So we're on the search for definitions, but not definitions of words, definitions that uncover the nature of something. And the thing we're most interested at this point is in the nature of right and wrong. And specifically, what do all right acts have in common that make them right? Because if we could figure that out, we would have criteria we could use that we could apply to all sorts of different cases. And we'd have something that would tell us whether that thing is right or that thing is wrong. So think of it this way. Take 3 right actions: giving to the poor, keeping your promises, and forgiving others. And suppose over the weekend I help out at a soup kitchen at ACU, so I'm helping the poor. I promised to help out, so I kept my promise. And while I'm working there, someone wrongs me and I forgive them. So I forgave them, I did something else right. What do those 3 right acts have in common that make each of them right? Is it location? Is it that they're all right because I performed those actions in a soup kitchen? No, because then that would leave out all sorts of other right things to do or right actions in this world. What about the fact that they were performed on the same day? Should we say that an action is right only if it is performed on August 28, 2019? That doesn't make any sense either. Although that is something they all have in common. They were all performed on the same day, but that doesn't really get at their nature, their essence. Or the fact that they were all performed by me. Should we say that an act is right only if it is done by Dr. Bryson? No, that doesn't work either. So we're looking for what they all have in common that uncovers their nature or their essence, that gets at their structure. And you're already familiar with this. What do all bachelors have in common that make them bachelors? They're unmarried adult males. What do all samples of water have in common that make them water? They are H2O. Anytime we use one word and apply it to a whole bunch of different things, those things should have something in common to justify the use of that word. So take car, for instance. If I use that word to speak of the vehicle in my driveway, plus my house, plus my children, that would be an unusual use of that word. It wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't know what I'm talking about because those things don't appear to have much in common. And that's what we're doing in the humanities, actually. The humanities, in essence, is the search for what it is that humans have in common that make them human, not so much on what makes us different, but what makes us the same, what unites us all as human beings. What is it that we all should be striving for together? Now, another thing that Socrates and Plato noticed is that we have this habit of launching into discussions and debates about issues that are very important without stepping back and doing the preliminary philosophical work. So we launch into discussions about whether a war is just without asking, well, what would make it just? Is it the consequences? Maybe. But that's a particular view of justice. And as you'll see in Hume 301, it's a view that most people aren't willing to swallow because it has some implausible implications. Or the abortion issue or euthanasia, we launch into those discussions without stepping back and saying, what would make abortion right or wrong in the first place? Or we appeal to political rights, like the right to life of the fetus or the right of the woman to determine what happens into her body, without asking, what is a right? Is it something that's only given to us by the government? Are they inherent? So Socrates and Plato would say, we need to stop, take a step back, and do the hard preliminary work of trying to figure out what is it that we are searching for and what is its nature. Now, we already know to do this about practical matters. Suppose we're in Africa and you're about to leave for the day to go on a safari and take pictures of animals. And I'm in my tent and I'm not feeling well. You're sitting in the Jeep and I run up to the Jeep and I ask you to take a picture of a bush baby for me. And before you can ask me any more questions, the bush baby takes off. And the natural question to ask would be, what is a bush baby? Because if you're going to go on a search for a bush baby, you better know what you're looking for, how to find it, what characteristics does a bush baby have. And yet, we launch into discussions about the justice of wars without asking, what is justice? What am I looking for? What criteria specify what would make something just or unjust in the first place? Now, there's an important disanalogy between the bush baby and looking for the definition of what makes an act right. With the bush baby, you really don't need the definition. You don't need the scientific definition of a bush baby, because bush babies look a certain way. And as long as you know what they look like, you can identify them, even if you can't give the scientific definition of a bush baby. But unfortunately, we can't do the same thing with morality, because morality doesn't look a certain way. It doesn't sound a certain way. It doesn't feel a certain way. It would be great if every time we did a morally right action, the scene around us would turn gray for like a minute and then resaturate with color. Or every time we did something wrong, we would hear the wah wah sound. That would indicate to us that, hey, we're doing what's wrong. But we don't have that. We don't have these physical characteristics that we can identify that says, okay, if something has this physical characteristic, then it must be right. Rightness doesn't have any particular shape, any particular color. Now, you might think we have something equivalent to that in Christianity. The Bible. The Bible is our wah-wah sound, telling us which things are right and which things are wrong. But imagine that that sound only occurred occasionally and not all the time, and only with regard to very specific issues or matters. You'd want to know what occasions that sound so that when it doesn't occur, you know what to look for to see if that sound should occur. And the same with the Bible. The Bible gives us outstanding instruction, moral instruction, about what's right or wrong, what the good is. But it doesn't address everything. And there'll be times where the issues in front of us may seem to exceed what the Bible tells us. So we need to figure out why God commands or forbids certain things, which is the question, what makes something right and what makes something wrong? What are their nature? What is the essence of those things? So we could give quite a few reasons for thinking the most basic, the most fundamental question that we've identified is important. But let's talk about some practical reasons why this question is important. If you address this question, if you figure out what makes an act right or wrong in the first place, then you'll know what to look for when thinking about important moral issues, and you will know how to find the answer. Consider capital punishment. What should we be looking at when thinking about whether capital punishment is just or unjust? Utilitarian will tell us to look to the consequences. What is the consequences, or what are the consequences of capital punishment? Which means we need to do some tough empirical work and consult the data of what happens in states where they use capital punishment and what happens in places where they don't. It's not an easy question to answer. The utilitarian, with regard to the abortion issue, is going to say what matters most is the consequences. If you want to know whether abortion is right or wrong, just look at the consequences for society, the consequences on the mother. If abortion is forbidden, what are the consequences on her psychologically if she has to carry the fetus to term? But a conflicting view, a different view, the cultural relativist view says an act is right not when it produces the best consequences, but when the culture approves of it. Which means if you want to know whether abortion is right or wrong, all you have to do is take a poll and find out what the culture approves of. If they approve of it, it's right. If they disapprove of it, it's wrong. And then a different conflicting view is the subjectivist view, which says an act is right when I approve of it, wrong when I disapprove of it. When thinking about the abortion issue, I don't need to think about things nearly so complicated as the rights of the mother and the rights of the fetus. All I should do is introspect and see if I approve or disapprove of abortion. So our answer to that most basic question completely changes what sorts of things are relevant to the abortion issue. Let's do one more, capital punishment. Like I said, the utilitarian would say capital punishment is justified if it produces the best consequences. But a conflicting view is the retributivist view, which is a mouthful. And retributivism says whether capital punishment is justified depends entirely on whether it is what the person deserved. Does the punishment fit the crime? So a retributivist would say, if you're asking whether capital punishment is a just form of punishment for a mass serial killer who did unspeakable things to his victims, they'd probably say yes, that is the appropriate form of punishment. Their view is backward looking. What did the person do? What punishment fits the crime? The utilitarian view is entirely forward-looking, not what punishment would fit the crime, but what can we do now to produce the best consequences? And hey, if therapy would produce the best consequences, if making this person a functioning member of society would produce the best consequences, the utilitarian has to say yes, not punishment. We shouldn't be punishing. We should be focusing on reforming. So both of those views tell us to look in completely different places when thinking about the capital punishment issue. No wonder we can't agree on all these important questions. And no wonder our debates give off more heat than light, because we're often looking in different places for the answer. And also, we're often looking in contradictory places for the answer, because we don't know what we think as to what makes an act right or wrong in the first place.